Hi, and welcome to another Lunchtime StackUp series. I'm super excited to have Yelena Osin here, who is the VP of Marketing at Fireblocks. We first met, I'm trying to get the dates right, I'm going to say 2010.
That sounds about right.
Back when General Assembly used to be a co-working space where people actually worked out of it as opposed to taking classes there. And so it feels like 10 years ago. Super early time in the tech community. And you've built out a really great startup marketing career in that time, some full-time, some consulting, and you had some interesting stuff to share about helping to launch Fireblocks. I'm thrilled to have you here, and I'm going to get out of your way. So thanks for joining us.
Awesome. Thanks for inviting me, Charlie. I really appreciate it. I guess when you mentioned General Assembly, I was thinking about when Kanye West showed up, and that was, I think, at the peak of GA before they kind of shifted business models. So I don't know, that just popped in my head, and Kanye West's career has definitely taken some turns since then, for good or bad. But that kind of little anecdote, just kind of that story popped in my head. But like you said, I'm working at Fireblocks today, and what I wanted to kind of, if I have 20 minutes, I thought the most interesting way to spend that 20 minutes is actually talking about something that happened at Fireblocks really early on in the kind of stealth mode days. So I joined Fireblocks around April of last year, and the CEO, Michael, basically told me that I want you to launch Fireblocks as soon as possible. I told him, listen, I'm planning a wedding. I'm going to get married in end of June. And he was like, great, just launch it before your wedding. And that's essentially how we ended up with this 8-week timeline. So he said, just get it done before you leave, and then we'll be in a good shape. So I had about 10 weeks, but I wanted to give myself about 2 weeks in case anything went wrong or right after the launch to make sure that I was still available. So that's kind of how we ended up having to pull all this together in 8 weeks. But I think there's some really interesting learnings in that, because when you have such a short timeline, you kind of have to stay really focused. And if I went back and did this again, these are the things that I think I would double down on, and this is how I would focus my time. So anybody else who's maybe in the situation or thinking about how to launch a startup and with limited time and resources, hopefully this will be valuable for you. So a little bit about myself. I've been doing marketing for the last 12 years. 8 of those I've been in B2B marketing. One of the main kind of themes of my career has been emerging technology, and anywhere from cyber to VR. Now I'm in blockchain. The other interesting note on that topic is that most of them are really early stage startups. So either helping companies go from C to Series A, from Series A to Series B, and with that, generally, if you're in the B2B space, you probably are going after like mid-market enterprise accounts. You have a small team and you have a limited budget. And so that's really where my expertise comes into play. And then in terms of Fireblocks, I'll give you guys a little bit of a background on that before we jump in, just to set a little bit of context on what I'm going to be talking about. So Fireblocks is essentially a B2B cybersecurity startup that is targeting financial institutions, really going after those crypto players that kind of identified an opportunity in crypto really early on the institutional side, hedge funds, prop traders, OTC desks, exchanges, and essentially what they ended up realizing is there's a lot of money to be made. They're early, like basically they have the first mover advantage because everybody's unsure of the space, so they're just going to make a bunch of money really quick. And one of the things that they realized is they need a really quick and safe way to move digital assets from point A to point B. Each transaction that they're making is usually between $150 to $1 million, and they're doing this 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 times a day. And in that, there's basically 2 or 3 things that can go wrong. One, the hackers have realized that there's a ton of opportunity within the crypto space to make a lot of money because the blockchain is immutable. You can't get those assets back if something happens. So the hackers have kind of focused their energy on the crypto institutional side. There's also human error that can happen if you're accidentally putting in the deposit address and there's a real, maybe you have, you make a mistake, you're sending it, Ethereum to Bitcoin or things like that. And then there's internal fraud. So there's a lot of folks early on that would set up businesses, take a lot of money, and then fake their own death and run away and just walk away with like $50 billion. So there's a ton of different ways that you can lose those assets. And when you're doing it very quickly and there's high frequency and high volume, there's a lot of room for error. So again, these guys are really early in the market and there weren't any real enterprise solutions. So everything that they had created was really manual and insecure and kind of hacked together. And today, there's tons of reports on this, but there's been billions that have been lost over the years and billions made. So Fireblocks was really created to solve this problem so people can actually safely move their digital assets and kind of move them around different trading venues and exchanges and things like that, and focusing on the institutional side. So that's a little bit of Fireblocks today. But when I joined back in April, when you go to the website, this is basically what it looked like. I didn't grab a screen capture, I wish I did, but it was the logo, it said contact us, and that was it. It was completely in stealth mode. And the story that they were telling prospects was, we store your digital assets and we're using all this new breakthrough technology to do that. And so that was essentially the starting point. And the first thing that we really had to nail down in those 8 weeks is positioning. So I kind of approached it in 3 different ways. One, I wanted to look at the competitors and I wanted to understand exactly what they were saying and find a way to differentiate ourselves from them. 2, I wanted to listen to as many sales calls as possible. And I often find that the answer is often an objection. So the 3rd one is the category creation. So it's very common for startups these days to be thinking about creating a category versus entering an existing one. And then I guess one of the main takeaways from that process, with a limited amount of time, what we realized is we couldn't really come up with a name that everybody agreed on, and we didn't want to focus too much time on creating a name. So we actually just started thinking about selling the problem instead. So we didn't want to enter a category. We didn't have a name for a new one. And so my advice to anybody that's in this situation is just forget about all of that, focus on actually selling the problem, and the market will actually give you feedback. The analysts will come in and start giving you feedback, and that will actually start to play out over the next 6 to 12 months, maybe even a little bit longer. And then in terms of the competitors, everybody that we looked at was calling themselves a wallet or a storage solution. So we needed to find a way to kind of differentiate. And when I listened to the sales calls, all of our kind of prospects were telling us the same thing. Like, listen, we just spent, all of 2018 looking for wallets and storage providers, implementing that infrastructure. Now it's summer of 2019. That's the last thing we want to do. And then I started to kind of realize that the real problem isn't in storing the assets, it's really around securely moving them. And that's where the problem selling really kind of started to come together for me. The next stage was really thinking about how do I bring that into the messaging. One of the things that I think is very common in a kind of a small startup is you end up just talking to your internal team often and validating your ideas through that. And because you don't have a massive customer base, you think, we're just going to figure this out together. I didn't want to just rely on what we thought. And we only had about 2 or 3 customers at the time. They were really our design partners. So I put together a survey. It was 5 questions. I'm happy to share that out. But essentially out of those 8, 4 of them responded. And from those 4, what I started to realize is that everybody was talking about that Fireblocks really helped them move the assets. They didn't really mention the storage. They kept saying, well, I can actually quickly and safely move my assets. This allows me to move my assets often, 24/7. I have access to my assets. And so I kind of honed in on that movement piece and realized, 1, it checks off the first box. It's nothing that any of our competitors have claimed. 2, we don't need to go to our customers and tell them to switch wallets because we're bringing them a solution that actually helps them move those assets. And 3, the problem statement was that securely moving digital assets is a nightmare. So those things kind of started to come into place. And then on top of that, the last thing I wanted to say around messaging is you don't need to necessarily overthink the testing. Early on, when you're just meeting new people, meeting prospects, going to happy hours, just basically jumping on Zoom calls, start changing your pitch right away. Try to see if that is actually resonating with your prospects. You don't have to do any big data analytics. If you have the time and you have the budget, great. That's always nice to be able to kind of augment that. But I think if you're lean and mean and you want to validate it, I would say just have your CEO start changing the pitch and see how that resonates and see if that actually leads to more opportunities and meetings. I bring that up because that was actually something that we noticed as well. I kind of had to corner the CEO one day and basically say, like, listen, you have to start using this messaging. We need to see if this works. And he's like, okay, fine. And he goes to a meetup, runs into somebody he tried to sell to in the past and was able to actually get a new meeting and close that deal. And he came back to me and was like, it worked. Like, that actually was effective. So my advice is force everybody in the company to adopt the new messaging and start testing it as soon as possible. On the other kind of spectrum, outside of the positioning and messaging, we had to create a website. And again, we didn't have the time or the budget really to just go and create like a full-fledged corporate website. So it forced us really to kind of hone in on a couple of pages. And what we did is we actually focused all of our energy on making those few pages as powerful as possible. We had spent some time thinking about our about mission statement, which I think sometimes gets glossed over when you're so early. We took really nice headshots of our team. We put all the investor logos. We really made sure that those pages had product shots, good, strong copy. The request access page was a landing page with like everything that you would want to have on there, FAQs, testimonials. Like, we really flexed those pages to do a lot of heavy lifting for us. And the thing that we asked ourselves along the way is, what do we need to say on this website today to get people to take the next step and to set up a demo with us? One of the other things that I want to mention around the website is being really hyper-focused with the copy. I think it's a rule of thumb that you want to speak to your target audience, you want to talk to your customer, but when you're so early stage as a company, you kind of think like, all right, we only have a couple of customers, we don't have all this validation, do we want to kind of corner ourselves, and whatever we say now, let's maybe stay general because we want to be able to then pivot from any kind of feedback that we get. And I struggled with this decision, and I ended up actually being super hyper-focused. So instead of saying, hey, we help financial institutions, I actually went all in and said, listen, we help OTC and hedge funds. And I spoke directly to that customer base. And at the time, I was a little bit nervous about that because I didn't know if we were going to actually turn away additional markets or customers that might be interested in. And I think that was actually really successful for us. And then one rule of thumb, I guess, something that I've learned along the way when working with technology startups is that when you're working with emerging tech, there's this need to defend your technology, and you waste a lot of your website real estate kind of explaining the technology, defending it, backing it up, and you kind of start just kind of going off on a side rant. So what I recommend is take all that stuff, nerd out, explain everything that makes your new technology amazing, put that into a solution brief or a white paper and direct people to that, and then use your actual real estate to continue talking about the benefits of that. So if you're claiming something is going to be faster, better, yes, it's, the subheading of that is, it's because we're using this new technology, read more about it here, versus dedicating an entire website just to defend what you guys are currently doing. And then after we really figured out the positioning, the messaging, our website, we thought about how we're actually going to get awareness and leads on launch day. And there's two things that we did. One was PR and one was social. I really want to talk about PR because I think that, again, if you're budget constrained, you might not be you might not want to invest in a PR firm because they are expensive. I think from my experience that PR is actually one of the best, investments you can make early on, even if you don't stick with that PR firm or you don't end up working with them for the next year. At least for the first 2-3 months, and especially for the launch, you want to use that launch or funding announcement as a way to kind of get your company out there. It's really like reporters love it, the media love it. And if you launch with a blog post, you're really missing an opportunity to get your name in the headlines, because the media doesn't care about the little guys, like, the kind of startups that we're launching. They care about the investors. They care about where the money's being moved and how markets are actually being expanded and developed. And so that's your opportunity to attach your name to the investors and the industry. And then after that point, the same reporters, they don't really care about product launches or anything like that. So what we've learned is that if you can start capturing data early on as a company, whatever that may be for you, it could be growth, it could be other, there's so many data-driven companies today. So, try to start thinking about the data and using that to plan your PR calendar and your PR strategy. And then for us, we actually started looking at the number of, or the volume of assets that were moving through Fireblocks, and we planned our first announcement when we hit $1 billion. Then we did another one around 30 billion, and now it's kind of a staple in terms of our PR strategy over for the next 6 to 12 months now. The other thing I'll note around PR is that I think that sometimes people get stuck between going with a boutique firm or a very large, well-known player in the space. They think maybe, if I'm gonna spend all this money, I want to go with the big guys. I want to use somebody that's super well-known. And that was another kind of decision that we had to make quickly, but I think it was the right one. We ended up going with a smaller boutique firm, and the kind of reasoning around that was, yes, there are big names, but the big names have a huge portfolio. Often they're competitors, which is probably why they were referred to you in the first place. But you're not going to be the first priority. There's only a handful of reporters that are really going to cover the story and care, and you're starting to have to compete to get that attention from your firm. So my recommendation is try to find a smaller firm, somebody that has 3 to 4 well-known names in the space, and somebody that you could have a really good conversation around the industry. If you meet a PR person that has a lot of insights and thoughts around your space and has a lot of opinions on the different players, that's a really good indicator that they know what's going on and how to actually pitch this correctly. So we ended up going with a company called Hoku PR. We're still using them today, and we're pumping out press releases and announcements. And we've been doing really, really well. And I think that was a decision that we all were kind of unsure how it was going to turn out. But we're really happy, and that's kind of my recommendation if you're kind of struggling between those two kind of buckets. And then in terms of social, that was another, I think, huge factor of the success that we had with the launch. So again, there's best practices and things that you hear all the time, focus on a channel. And at the time, because we were time constrained, we knew that we weren't going to be able to build up presence and build up followers and focus our attention on all these channels. We didn't even have a LinkedIn page. We didn't have Twitter. So we had to set those up essentially, make sure that we claimed the brand name and we claimed the usernames. But we focused on LinkedIn, and Twitter was kind of like a P2 that's nice to have, but all of our attention was on LinkedIn. And what we decided is we're going to tee up one post on LinkedIn, one on Twitter, and a week before, we're essentially going to reach out to every single person that we could think of that is relevant in the space. Your mom, dad, your friends, like that's nice, but think about, who your CEO knows, who your CTO knows, who the sales rep knows, who your investors know. And we essentially created a Google sheet, had everybody, and it's super labor intensive, but had everybody essentially put their contacts in there and say, okay, these are the folks that I'm bringing to the table. We crafted a message that basically said, hey, can you do us a quick favor? We're launching out of stealth mode. Would be great if you can shine some light on this announcement. And we're happy to return the favor, essentially, whenever you guys need it to. And the morning of the launch, we teed up those 2 posts, one on LinkedIn, one on Twitter, and literally emailed every single person one-to-one and said, hey guys, the day's here, we're launching, please like, share, engage with this post. And that was incredibly successful. We didn't use any advertising. We didn't do anything like that. We just used organic reach, and we kind of flexed the Rolodex to be able to kind of get the name out in our community. And today, I just wanted to point that out, that we're still using that approach and we've been able to build up some momentum. But we created the LinkedIn page last year, like June 9th, and today we're at 1,500 followers. Most of our posts get around a 5% engagement rate, and we're really happy with that. So I kind of talked through, some of the main core decisions and how we arrived at them. But now I want to kind of talk about some of the results that we saw from that. So within the first 72 hours of the launch, we saw a ton of press. And again, I think it had to do with the fact that we had a good investor. We had a nice, we raised $60 million, but we used that to our advantage, right? We didn't just push out a blog post and say, here we are. We actually prepared this about 3 weeks in advance, pitched as many reporters as we possibly could, and we ended up getting over 40 stories in the first 3 days. We kind of hit a couple of different markets, crypto, finance, cyber, and then we even were able to kind of land a couple of stories that were outside of the US as well. And then on social, kind of going back to this idea of like flexing your Rolodex, these are the 2 posts that we made. And then in the first 3 days, the video that we posted had 9,000 views. It was almost incredible, right? Like we had a LinkedIn page that had no followers, didn't even exist 24 hours before, and now we were getting an amazing amount of reach. You guys can see there was 200 followers that we did in that first week. Twitter also blew up, and I think the people that helped us spread the word had a good following. They had kind of some mediocre presence, and altogether on an aggregate, it actually contributed to a good amount of attention for us on social. And then in terms of like really what it all comes down to, especially in the B2B world, is leads and sales opportunities for the sales team. So again, this is first 3 days. We had 138 people come to the website, downloading the white paper. 58 of them actually requested demos. And sometimes that could be like analysts, reporters, students. So I thought it was interesting to point out that 52% of them were actually in the C-suite. And you can see a breakdown of the titles and the types of businesses that we saw. And this number actually improved as the weeks continued. And then at the bottom, I kind of just gave you guys an update 60 days after launch. We had 20 ops that were created, 1.3 million in opportunities. And overall, the sales team essentially was flooded. They didn't have enough time to respond to everybody. I can talk about that from the BDR perspective and having a good follow-up process in place. But at the time, we had a small team, and they essentially were able to just cherry pick the accounts that they wanted to reach out to and close those deals. So that's essentially how we launched Fireblocks in 8 weeks.
Cool. I have a question. So you talked a little bit about things you posted, the idea of putting your tech in a white paper. Could you kind of go through a little bit of the marketing content and collateral? I saw it look like on that tweet you might have had a video.
Yep.
The founder. So as you think about like the checklist of content for launch, like what did you actually create?
Yeah. That's a really great question. And I didn't want this to be so long, so I cut out a couple of corners, but I do have an answer to that. So for the launch, we had a few things created. One is we decided that the launch, we had the 2 big design partners, and they were pretty big in the space. So we went on site, made a video with them, and that's what we used for our social media. That was the post. And we used that above the fold of our website. So that was really the first thing you saw. It was muted, but you could just see something playing in the background, and the call to action was hear it for yourself. I don't know how many people actually clicked on that, but they were big logos, big names, and it kind of gave us, made our website a little bit more dynamic. But going back to your question around content, we had 2 assets. We had one, it was a white paper that talked about the new technology that we're using. We're using MPC and SGX, and we're approaching security completely differently, and we're using breakthrough cryptography. So we just put all that into a white paper, and that was available for download on their website at the very bottom of the homepage. Mm-hmm. And then in terms of sales enablement,
just to put a pin on that, did you just allow anybody to download, or did you email capture for the download?
It was gated, absolutely.
Okay.
So yeah, that was where I think the majority of our leads were split between people requesting access and then people downloading the white paper.
Mm-hmm.
And then today I have processes in place with the BDR team that actually reaches out to those folks. But back then it was just hitting the CRM and it was just like, it was insane. People didn't, nobody even knew how to prioritize it. And I was like literally trying to plan my wedding. So I was like, I really have to go. You guys, here are the leads. Here's the opportunities. Go for it. I'll be back in 2 weeks.
You just create like a type form, or did you actually use something like software to?
It was HubSpot. So we actually used HubSpot for everything. So the actual executive team was very familiar with HubSpot. They liked using it. And at the time, we didn't need a massive like CRM like Salesforce. So we just signed up with HubSpot, applied for the startup package, which I think gives you 50% off for the first 2 years or the first year, and then kind of scales down year after year for the next 4 years. So we basically created 2 forms, gave those to the designer and development firm, and then they implemented that on the WordPress website.
Gotcha. The other question I had was, it's interesting because when you think about like numbers and setting expectations, you have a set of clients who are each like fairly large. You're not trying to get 50,000 users for a consumer site. Like
exactly.
For you guys, closing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 accounts in a month would be pretty big, right? So all of these numbers are taking into consideration that they're B2B.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, the deal it's definitely not a B2C launch by any means. But I think you're making a really good point, which is our average deal size is around 50K. So we have 20K deals, we have 150, 120, some of them are 500K, right? We're still a year and a half, out of stealth mode. So all those things are kind of our data is becoming normalized slowly. But, for us, I think we spent $36,000 on this launch.
Mm-hmm.
So, we got our money back and some, and we're able to launch Fireblocks out into the wild, get in front of the right people, inundate our sales team. And there are some additional like logos that I threw up there in some of my other presentations to the team around some of the big accounts that we actually brought in. There was 3, so I pointed that out here, but we had 3 opportunities that the team was chasing for like 6 months, and then kind of they lost some steam, and then from the launch they kind of came back around, and those are massive deals, like 200K. So definitely small numbers, but very high value.
I'm curious about the ongoing marketing efforts, particularly as it comes to like, what I find a lot of times is if you hire junior, they may not understand the strategy. But if you hire senior, they may not want to post the tweets every day. So how do you complement your experience with freelancers, part-time staff? Like, what does the marketing team actually look like in terms of everyone who's doing anything related to marketing?
Yeah, so I can talk about the team today. So it's myself, in terms of outside support, we have a PR team. We're still working with them. PR is a really big part of our strategy. We've really broken into the crypto kind of media and into that kind of bubble. And we're constantly, like I think last quarter, we did 8 announcements. We're constantly on the front of CoinDesk. So we're really, really active on the PR side because our customers are actually reading that and coming back to the website and subscribing, which is and requesting demos, which is really important to point that out.
Gotcha. I'll jump in with a PR specific question because you brought it up.
Okay.
How do you set realistic expectations for like how much press, like how do you know whether your PR firm is doing a good enough job? And
I don't think anybody ever, so this is what happens. I don't think, and this is my opinion, but I don't think anybody's ever happy with their PR team because there's always a competitor or a story that you wish you were part of, right? So you always feel like, oh, why didn't we get that? And why didn't we get that? So it's in a one way, it feels like they're never doing enough. But I guess on the other side, there's so many opportunities. And so whenever we see that, as long as the team is able to kind of if you're setting those goals and you're saying, listen, we've been crushing crypto, we want to start breaking out into cyber, and then they say, yeah, no problem, and they're not able to deliver that, that's a pretty clear indicator that they have specialty and they have some gaps in terms of, where they can actually, where their expertise can reach. And I think that's a good time to evaluate what your company is doing and what kind of PR firm might be a better fit.
Gotcha. So it almost sounds like you're gauging their activity level, not just on hits, but they're presenting opportunities to you. Hey, we know about this. This came up. I mean, sometimes you get it, sometimes you don't, but at least they're like paying attention to the market.
Exactly. And I'll say on PR, there's a lot of newsjacking. That's like a very common strategy from PR teams. And I've never seen that drive any real demand. So it's always like, hey, there's somebody, wants some commentary in this story about blah, blah, blah. And then you chase your CEO around for 3 days, you get the quote, you finalize it, you get it out there. And then 3 weeks later, you get an article and the quote's like, security is important. Like, that's not going to move the needle for you in any kind of way, but I think it's easy to get distracted with those kind of opportunities. So my advice is, after you kind of get that initial launch announcement out, you have to be thinking about your data and how you can slice and report on that data, because now you're giving the media something to work with.
Gotcha. Cool. Okay, so you got your PR team. Who else is there?
Then working with an outside design development company. I know that like within a small team, it's really hard for marketing to get those development and design resources. You're kind of like the last people they really care about servicing. And I feel like a lot of times marketing really needs good, solid design, good landing pages. And if you can find a firm, I'm happy to recommend one that is able to work with you. And again, like I really like the boutiques that are kind of like the up and coming guys who do amazing work, have like landed a couple of bigger accounts and just kind of at the up and up. Like those are amazing boutique firms to work with, because they're gonna be super talented, young, trying to grow their business. And I try to shy away from working with like big agencies, because they charge a lot. You're not their favorite customer, because you're not going to be able to bring in the biggest contract for them. And so that's kind of my recommendation, but it's a design and development team in one that we use to build our website. Anytime we need a one sheet created, anytime we're going to events, or when that was the thing, when we used to go to events and test some of that out, they'd do all their booth, and essentially they were just on retainer for us. And then recently we started using an SEM agency called ClickToast to start playing around with AdWords. And there needs to be a ton more optimization on that front. But for now, we've just been creating campaigns around competitor keywords. And I think that's kind of, again, like trying to find people that are maybe farther down the funnel, because you want to be able to drive results. You want to be able to get into conversations where your competitors are at. And so when I think about spending budget, I think about how do I get into how do I capture people with the right buying intent, instead of trying to get like somebody at the very, very top of their journey, which is, I think, really great with SEO and something you can do from a content perspective. But early on, you need to be able to just generate revenue.
Gotcha. So it's interesting. You kind of pointed out that for some aspect of the site, like the PR team has its own people that they can go to be like, hey, I need this thing moved around on the site, like as opposed to pulling people off of the core product.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. Yeah, because you're never gonna be a priority, because the product comes first, right? And it makes sense. As a marketing person, you wanted an amazing product because you're driving traffic, you're getting everybody excited, and then once the product delivers on that, now you can capture that word of mouth and referral. And that's kind of, going back to your question around what does marketing look like today? We've had incredible word of mouth and referral traffic, and we're actually experimenting with ways to scale that and automate that and create a funnel for those people.
Gotcha. You mentioned the idea of like sort of creating a category and separating from your competitors, and David was asking about this category of moving. Are you still focused on that new category, or have you sort of now expanded? Is your category definition the same a year in?
It's so interesting because we go through phases, right? And initially, I'll keep this short, but everybody hated the idea. So everybody was like, no, that sucks. That's not going to work. Nobody cares about that. I think everybody on the team was like, that doesn't make sense. went in front of the board, presented the launch plan. The board literally said, "You're never going to drive any leads from that. That doesn't make any sense." And I was like, all right, well, I've done a lot of validation and research and business. Like I've gone, the process I walked you guys through. Like I arrived here not from a gut instinct, but I thought about this, and I think this is the way to go. And when we launched, it was incredibly effective. And today there's been moments where people are really grateful that we did that, because, I've heard the CEO on multiple occasions bring up the fact that, like, listen, if we just launched as a custody provider, as a storage provider, we wouldn't be in half of these conversations, because people are looking for something different. They're open to having a conversation about something different. They're like, all right, wallet, it's better, it's whatever, better technology, I have a wallet, like whatever. We're trying to grow our business. This isn't going to grow our business. But okay, so you're telling me there's a issue around the way that we move assets, and you're telling me we can't go faster unless we fix that. Okay, we're open to hearing that. And kind of to go back to your question around if we're still using that today, yeah, I think it is a core part of our messaging, but naturally it's evolving as the product is evolving. And as we are thinking about, okay, how do we break out of crypto? We're at 100 customers today. We've captured some of the biggest names in the space, and now we're kind of breaking out and going after the payment processors like PayPal. We're going after the traditional banks, the challenger banks, all the guys that are looking to actually launch digital asset solutions in the space. And so we're thinking about how to position ourselves for that. And the question that we're asking ourselves today is, do we launch a separate product? Do we need to position it differently? Do I need to hire a product manager who's only focused on the traditional space and continue going continuing with the path that we have with crypto? So that's like, I don't have an answer for that, but that's where we're at today. So moving digital assets, it's still core to our messaging. It's something we talk about on a daily basis. It's some of the reasons, it's still the reason why we get into conversations and what people know us for. And one anecdote I'll add on that is that we actually saw a lot of competitors over the last couple of months start adjusting their messaging to address that, because I'm guessing they're hearing that in their sales calls and they're hearing that from the prospects. So now you hear people saying, yeah, we store your assets and we make sure that they're moved securely. Like people are pending their messaging to include that. And I think that's a really good sign.
Gotcha. Cool. So we've got separate separate design, development,
Yep.
Outside PR. Anybody else full-time on the core team?
So I brought in a content person early on. They didn't have any crypto experience, but they fast learner, good attitude, somebody who can get up to speed. And they've been on the team just writing blog posts, presentations, and essentially not having a crypto or fintech background, but just being somebody who's like interested in it, passionate, wants to learn about it, and is super coachable. And so we have somebody that's doing content for us full time. And just
they had a writing background before of some kind?
Yeah, a couple of years. I had actually hired him as an intern a while ago at a different startup, and really enjoyed working with him. And just when I thought about it, being a small team, I was like, oh, I need this guy here. He's going to be able to we'll be able to work together and figure this out and tell these stories. And then today, just last week, we hired a demand generation manager and a product marketing person, just thinking about the next kind of leg of this tour and what we're going to be doing and who we're going after. We're definitely going to need support.
Gotcha. Cool. Well, listen, thanks so much for spending time with us. I really appreciate it. And hopefully at some point in the next year, we'll see you in the same place.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for having me. Really, really enjoyed it.
All right. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Thanks.